Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. Happy New Year. I hope you guys, all the listeners across the platform, have had a great festive season. But it's back to the grind. It's back to UFC events. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 67, which is headlined by Nassourdine Imavov versus Kelvin Gastelum. And like I said, our first event of the year in 2023 and what feels like our first event in a very, very long time. Just before I get into the breakdowns though, as always from the last event, there is a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software from the AI. So if you are interested in the AI, how it performs, there's a playlist specific to Base AI on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But right now we're getting straight into it, into the main event. As I've already mentioned, we've got Nassourdine Imavov versus Kelvin Gastelum. And I think this is going to be a really tough fight for Kelvin Gastelum, if I'm being honest. He's a fighter that, you know, he's not old. He's 31 years old. And from an age perspective, I'm sure he's got plenty of time left. However, the one thing you have to mix into this is the mileage on the clock. Kelvin Gastelum started his career really early. He's been fighting the best of the best. He's been in a ton of wars as well. And listen, he's got Mexican blood, so I'm not saying that the durability or anything like that's going to be off. I don't think he's going to be susceptible to being knocked out. That Mexican blood runs real thick. So I think that what I mean by the mileage and the wars is it does take its toll on the body. And I do think that Kelvin Gastelum is now declining. How fast he's declining, I'm not sure. He's definitely still going to be competitive within, you know, the lower end of the top 15 and obviously against unranked fighters as well. But when you're looking towards the top of the division and you're looking at prospects like Nassourdine Imavov, who are massively rising up the division, I think that Kelvin Gastelum's going to have a difficult job. And, you know, his recent record proves that as well. Since 2019, you know, over the last 4 years, he's won one fight out of 6. And that was against Ian Heinisch, a fighter that he should be beating. He did dominate, but Nassourdine Imavov also dominated and beat Ian Heinisch as well. So it's going to be a real showcase, in my opinion, for Imavov, who's going to be, you know, headlining his first event. The one question mark you do have to have over Imavov is, what does he look like in rounds 4 and 5, especially against a Kelvin Gastelum that is going to be pressuring and pressing the action. But the thing is, I do feel like Kelvin Gastelum might end up looking the worst fighter over if we do get into that 4th and 5th round, because Imavov will be putting it on him. Kelvin Gastelum's giving up height advantages, reach advantages, leg reach advantages, and I think even if he tries to take Imavov down, we've seen good takedown defense from Imavov, enough to be able to really stuff the takedowns, get back into space, exit angle and come back in again. And I think that Imavov's just going to be landing those nice, straight, technical, crisp punches down the middle. I think he's going to be landing good knees as well. Again, that's something Gastelum's going to have to look out for if he is shooting takedowns. I feel like Gastelum has definitely fought the better level of competition. He's been in there with the best fighters in the world, pretty much all of them in that middleweight division. And I think that he does have a skill set that's going to make this fight somewhat competitive, but I just think that Imavov is that fighter on the rise. I think that he is going to be able to put his game together better. I think he's going to be able to stuff at least the majority of the takedowns that Kelvin Gastelum throws, because I do think Gastelum's going to be searching for takedowns here. I think that Gastelum trying to strike into range is just going to get clipped on his way in, and then when he is hanging around on the outside, Imavov with that length and height advantage, the reach advantage, I just think he's going to be able to put it on Gastelum at more ranges in this fight, and that's going to be where the biggest problem is. I think Imavov could be live for a potential TKO in this fight, but if he doesn't, over 5 rounds, I do expect him to do the better work. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nassourdine Imavov to win this fight. And in the co-main event, man, this has got to be one of the most anticipated fights on the entire card. We've got Dan Ige versus Damon Jackson. Now, Dan Ige, very similar to actually what I've just been talking about with Kelvin Gastelum, is a fighter that has been in there against some of the best. Obviously, he's not got as much mileage on the clock as what Kelvin Gastelum's got, but still the similarities of Dan Ige being in there with some of the best fighters in the division. He's won one fight out of his last 5. That was against a fighter that he should be beating in Gavin Tucker. And then the rest of the fighters have been, you know, towards the top end of the division. And then on the flip side here, you've got Damon Jackson, who's on an absolute tear right now. against fighters that aren't at the level that Ige's been beating. So there's definitely a good dynamic here of, where both fighters are at. And I actually think that we revert back to the stylistic matchup here. It's obvious what Damon Jackson's going to do. Damon Jackson's going to want to come out here. He's going to want to wrestle. He's going to want to grapple. Whereas Dan Ige, I think his best path to victory is probably actually staying on the feet and looking to try and knock Damon Jackson out. He's been knocked out before, albeit by really good strikers. Example, Topuria being able to press him and then knock him out against the cage. But then it does beg the question of, if Damon Jackson is shooting takedowns relentlessly and looking to get Dan Ige down at all times, is that going to make Dan Ige hesitant to strike? Is it going to put Ige on the back foot where he's absolutely not as effective on the back foot as he is moving forward? So that's one question to be had. But then if Ige does decide to fight fire with fire, Dan Ige's a black belt in BJJ as well. It's not as if he's not capable on the mat. He's a very good grappler himself. But the thing is, if he does try and fight fire with fire, I feel that Damon Jackson is more likely to get the better of those exchanges on the mat. I think Damon Jackson's magnet for top control is there. He always just seems to be able to get in those advantageous positions, even if he's in a bad position himself. I think that this fight's going to be real back and forth, because I do think Ige is going to have some success early striking. The one concern that you've got to have with Damon Jackson is the fact that he's hittable. His striking is very herky-jerky. It works for him. It's unorthodox. It's weird. It's awkward. But it works for him from an offensive perspective. The thing is, it does come with holes from a defensive perspective. So, could we see a repeat of Ilia Topuria versus Damon Jackson? A repeat of Dan Ige versus Gavin Tucker? Absolutely, that's a possibility. But then, like I said, if that knockout doesn't happen and this fight does go late, both fighters can slow down, both fighters can tire. Then I think the natural game plan of both fighters in regards to being grapplers is probably going to come through as well. I just think this is going to be a real back and forth fight. I think that when we're looking at who wins this fight and how the fight's determined a winner, I do think the wrestling and grappling is going to play a big part in this fight, and I do think that Damon Jackson is that slightly better grappler, the slightly better scrambler, the fighter that is just going to be awkward everywhere and just end up in those slightly better positions at the right times, at the right moments. So it's a close fight. The line suggests it's going to be a close fight as well. And although, like I said, I do feel that there is going to be moments everywhere, it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight, I do think the work in the wrestling and the grappling is going to be slightly more than the work on the feet in the striking department. And for those reasons, I do have to slightly edge with Damon Jackson. So I'm picking Damon Jackson to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting one. We've got Punahele Soriano versus Roman Kopylov. Now, these are two fighters that I don't think have really hit the heights that a lot of people expected them to hit in the UFC. And they're both relatively young, especially in their careers as well. And they're both fighters that have got plenty of time ahead of them. So plenty of time for improvements, plenty of time for developments. But right now and recently, they have been really hit and miss. However, they have both got real solid traits about them in regards to the styles of fighting. So, for example, with Punahele Soriano, he's a good wrestler. He's a power puncher. I think that Soriano's just got to really start working on that blend of mixing in that strike into wrestling and trusting that wrestling a little bit more, because it does seem like he loves to throw heavy bombs and knock his opponents out. He's fell in love with his KO. You can absolutely see that for sure. And in some respects, you can understand it, because he's putting himself in a position where he can potentially earn an extra 50k every single fight by trying to land that big knockout, devastating knockout blow. So with Punahele Soriano, I think he's definitely got a good wrestling advantage, especially in this fight as well. Roman Kopylov comes from a striking background, a kickboxing background, and he's a very methodical striker. He's very technical. And the one good thing that I love about Kopylov is he's as good moving backwards as he is moving forwards in regards to his striking, which, again, you don't see too much. Most of the time, it's the fighter that's more comfortable striking moving forwards, and then he's a completely different fighter moving backwards. But that's not the case with Kopylov. He's also got decent defense as well. So when you're looking at the striking of this fight, I think that Soriano is going to be trying to land the big bombs. I just don't think he's going to land that big bomb, or I don't think there's a high probability of him landing that big bomb in this fight with how good Kopylov is as a striker. Of course, 4-ounce gloves, it only takes that one shot. But from a general perspective, Kopylov is going to be the better striker in this fight. This is where Soriano's got to mix his wrestling in, and we've seen Kopylov get taken down by Jurev, in their fight. But again, he made Jurev work really hard for every single takedown the longer the fight went on, to the point that Jurev was absolutely gassed out. So again, Kopylov's defensive wrestling is okay, and this is what's leaning me towards him, because I do think that Punahele Soriano's got the finishing upside for sure. If there's going to be a knockout on the feet, it's more likely going to be Soriano. Soriano's also got a wrestling advantage as well. So as a mixed martial artist, he's now got potentially 2 paths to victory. But the thing is, for Kopylov, he's shown good defensive wrestling. He's shown good striking. He's got a striking background. As long as he can avoid the bomb of Soriano and not get knocked out, I think that he can win this fight. So again, defensively, striking, moving backwards, wrestling defense, I think Roman Kopylov's got the tools here to be able to make this really competitive, and I do think it's going to be a close fight. I don't think that Kopylov's going to run away with it or anything. I just think that both fighters are very well matched offensively versus defensively, but I am siding with Roman Kopylov, so I'm picking Roman Kopylov to win this fight. And talking of intriguing fights, next up we've got Ketlen Vieira versus Raquel Pennington. And like I say, this is really interesting. I actually thought that Vieira, and again, no disrespect to Raquel Pennington, was going to get a fighter much higher up than, well, you can't really get much higher up than Holly Holm, but I thought that Vieira was going to be there or thereabouts for a title shot, if I'm being honest, because although a lot of people did see that Holly Holm fight as quite controversial in regards to the decision, I actually bet Vieira in that fight, and not for that reason, but I did think that Vieira did enough to win that fight with, trying to land the hard strikes and put it on Holm, who was just interested in closing the distance, clinching up against the cage and running the clock down. The judges hate that type of fighting, and in return, they absolutely love the fighter that's trying to land the hard shots. So you can absolutely see with the way that the judges are scoring fights that Vieira took the decision in that last fight, albeit a split decision. It was razor close. But the thing is as well, again, no disrespect to Pennington, but Pennington's been on the other end of a decision lost to Holly Holm twice. So the fact that they've matched Vieira against Pennington, it is a surprise from that perspective, but you can't forget that Pennington's on a 4-fight winning streak at the minute, and she's really looking good within those fights and fighting fights that are potentially a little bit tricky. But what Pennington does really well, it's her aggression and a short combination, so the 2, 3, 4 punch combinations, and she's smart as well. She won't always step on the gas. She'll appreciate that she can't always be the forward pressing fighter, so she will have moments where she does sit back a little bit, and then she'll burst into those short combinations to halt the aggression of her opponent and then come forwards again. So she's a smart striker. And the thing is, if this was before the Holly Holm and Vieira fight, I'd be a little bit more absolutely unsure here, because Vieira, I think, would be at a massive striking disadvantage. However, the one thing that I did notice with Vieira against Holly Holm is there was a big improvement in her striking. Now, that could have just been a one-off fight where she looked much better than she's looked before, but if those are general improvements and developments to a game, then I think that Vieira is going to be a bit of a problem moving forward for fighters in this division, because she looked to match Holly Holm, who does have a boxing and kickboxing background and has been a lifelong striker, and Ketlen Vieira looked the better striker in that fight. When Ketlen Vieira is also a black belt in judo, she's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, she's also a national wrestling champion in Brazil as well. So for Vieira's game, being a grappler, she's got all the tools around her to be able to enforce that game plan. And this is where I think that Pennington might have a difficult fight here, because I think Vieira is going to want to close the distance here. I think she is likely going to be the bigger, stronger fighter. So again, Raquel Pennington, a lot of her fights end up against the cage and the clinch, and normally she's the stronger fighter, and that's fine, but when she's not, she can really get pinned, as we saw against Holly Holm. So I think Vieira, if she is the bigger, stronger fighter, she's going to have advantages in the clinch, and that should be able to lead to takedowns. And then I do think that she's going to have the grappling advantage in a big way in this fight. So I think Vieira's got more ways to win this fight. I think that Raquel Pennington's strength is within her striking. I think Vieira could potentially match that. Maybe there's still a slight striking advantage for Pennington, but it shouldn't be anything that is drastic here. But then when you look at the other areas of the fight, the clinch game, the takedowns, the trips, the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu, I think those are all on the side of Vieira, who does seem to be shooting up the division at the minute. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ketlen Vieira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fighter that's looking every bit like a future world champion. We've got Umar Nurmagomedov versus Raoni Barcelos. Now, it's going to be interesting from Nurmagomedov's perspective because of the news that we got from Khabib, his cousin, who apparently is moving away from MMA completely, including coaching, cornering. So again, Umar Nurmagomedov's not going to be short of insane Russian Dagestani cornermen, but it just might not be Khabib. Raoni Barcelos, though, I do actually think is a really good step up in competition for Umar Nurmagomedov, because I don't think he's going to get run over as easy as what previous opponents have. But I don't think that Umar Nurmagomedov is going to be prevented of a win because of that here. I think that Barcelos is just going to make Umar a little bit more cautious in regards to making reads, not rushing in, not doing anything too daft in regards to taking bad takedown shots, entries, that sort of thing. I think Barcelos is going to keep Umar Nurmagomedov really honest in this fight, and because of that, I think we're going to see a much smarter approach from Nurmagomedov, a more technical approach. I do think there's got to be a game plan involved here as well, because I don't think you can just go in there and wing it against a guy like Barcelos, because he is powerful, he is explosive, he's got wrestling credentials himself, jiu-jitsu credentials, he's got power, he hurts opponent when he hits them. So Raoni Barcelos is a real full package in the division, but the thing is, Umar Nurmagomedov is just a level above here. I think from a striking perspective, Barcelos might be a little bit too aggressive, and Umar can potentially just sit back a little bit, be technical, and ultimately just pick and choose when he's coming forwards and when he's being aggressive himself. But where the real advantage in this fight for me is within the wrestling. And again, Barcelos isn't a bad wrestler. Not many fighters can get the better of Barcelos in regards to the wrestling. We don't often see Barcelos on his back, but Umar Nurmagomedov, just like Khabib Nurmagomedov, just like Islam Makhachev, all these guys are just a level above when it comes to the wrestling and the topside grappling. And I think we're going to see that again in this fight. I think Umar Nurmagomedov's going to get the takedowns he needs. I think the fight could be a little bit close on the feet, just because Nurmagomedov is just trying to be defensive and pick and choose when he shoots his takedowns to get good entries into the takedowns from a smart perspective, having a smart approach to the fight. So I do think the striking, there's not going to be too much there in regards to one fighter pulling away, because I think the takedowns are going to be there. So even if Raoni Barcelos did start to light Nurmagomedov up on the feet, which again is questionable, I think Umar Nurmagomedov's just going to get a hold of him, take him down, and I just think he's going to be able to control the rounds out from there. Maybe Barcelos stands up once or twice in the early moments on the first couple of takedowns, but I just can't look past that wrestling and grappling of Umar Nurmagomedov. Again, like I said with Khabib, with Makhachev, it's just on a completely different level, and I think we're going to see that again in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Umar Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight where I think somebody's going to end up out cold. We've got Abdul Razak Alhassan versus the newcomer Claudio Ribeiro. Now, again, both fighters hit ridiculously hard. Both fighters are aggressive. Both fighters love to come forwards, land combinations. So it's going to be a question of who actually lands that first clean, hard shot, and what's the durability like on either side as well. Now, I don't think either fighter has shown any real durability issues. I think that both fighters have taken shots quite well as well. So a couple of other things that I wanted to mention outside of that is, the first one is the speed advantage. I think that Alhassan is going to have a big speed advantage in this fight. Ribeiro, obviously he hits hard, he's looking the part, he's coming forwards being aggressive, but I do think that Alhassan's going to be the more athletic fighter. I think he's going to be the faster striker. Maybe not the faster mover, but definitely in the exchanges. I think Alhassan is just going to land that bit quicker. He's going to get his combinations in there a little bit quicker. And I think Ribeiro, for as hard as he hits, I also think that Alhassan is the slightly more technical striker as well. And I'm not saying Alhassan's a super technical striker, he wing shots himself, but Ribeiro does look to be slightly sloppier with his technique, and he also looks to be very slightly slower than Alhassan as well. So I think both of those as a combination together are going to cause real problems for Ribeiro. However, on the flip side to this, I think Ribeiro's got absolutely the better gas tank. I think that Alhassan, once he's out of that 7.5 minutes, will absolutely start slowing down. So if this fight goes late, I do think that Ribeiro could land a late knockout shot, or at least just completely take over late and make this fight close. But in the early moments, I think Alhassan's just going to be the sharper striker, the quicker striker, the better technical striker as well. And Ribeiro could end up getting tired by just taking a number of shots himself, or he could even get knocked out, just like a lot of fighters have done at the end of that right hand from Alhassan. So I think that it's an interesting fight. Both fighters, like I said, are carrying power. Both could connect. But I am going to side with Alhassan purely for the fact that I do think he's slightly better from a technical perspective. And I do think he has slightly more speed as well. And then you add the power into that. I think the early moments are going to be very difficult, and he might be able to get Ribeiro out of there early. Obviously, if he doesn't, it gets sketchier. I wouldn't still rule Alhassan out. He's shown a wrestling development in his last fight as well. How that works against Ribeiro, should he try that, I'm not sure. But like I said, in a fight that I believe is going to be won and lost on the feet with knockout power from either side, I'm going to side with the, in my opinion, better technical striker and the faster striker as well, the more athletic striker or fighter, should I say. And I'm picking Abdul Razak Alhassan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two newcomers. We've got Mateusz Rebecki versus Nick Fiore. Now, I wish we'd seen, or we were able to see more of Nick Fiore, because he looks like he's got a really slick grappling game. But even on the tape index at MMA Play 365, we've only got one fight of him, and we can only find one fight on the internet. So there's not too much to go on. However, from Rebecki's side, there's a lot to go on, and there's a lot to like about his game. Rebecki, he has seemingly a good chin. We've seen him eat big shots, big head kicks. He'll constantly walk forwards. He'll land big shots himself. He's got knockout power in his hands. He's built big, but then he's also got this really solid and strong wrestling game, powerful takedowns. He's able to pick his opponents up if he needs to and slam them down. And then he's got a decent grappling game as well. He reminds me a little bit of Mateusz Gamrot in regards to just having that strong wrestling, that good jiu-jitsu, and then having some power on the feet as well. Now, obviously, there's only a few similarities with Rebecki and Gamrot. You know, they're not a complete duplicate of each other, but still, both really got really good qualities and very similar qualities. Now, with Nick Fiore, it's going to be interesting because I do anticipate Rebecki being the better wrestler here. The striking, you know, it could be close. I don't think Rebecki's game is going to be tailored enough to make this fight won and lost on the feet, or the winner being determined by what happens on the feet. I think the winner's going to be determined within the wrestling and grappling scenarios, and it just begs the question is, once Rebecki takes Nick Fiore down, how good is Nick Fiore's grappling? Can he reverse positions? Can he scramble out? Can he get on top of Rebecki? And from what I've seen, Rebecki, it's going to be really difficult to do that against him. Again, there's not a whole lot to go on with Nick Fiore, so you've got to take that into consideration. But from what I've seen, Rebecki is durable, he's aggressive, he's got good power in his hands, he's got really powerful wrestling, really strong against the cage, and really strong top side as well. And I think that's going to be a nightmare for a lot of fighters in the division. And I think this is also a massive step up for Nick Fiore from the records of his previous opponents. So again, really difficult to pick Nick Fiore in this fight because of what we've seen of Rebecki and how strong he looks and how much better he is than any previous opponent Nick Fiore's fought. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mateusz Rebecki to win this fight. And in the next fight, another newcomer, we've got Mateus Mendonca versus Javid Basharat. Now, in my opinion, this fight doesn't make a lot of sense for Javid Basharat because in his last two fights, Javid Basharat's beaten better opponents, in my opinion, than Mendonca. The hype's real on Basharat. The ceiling's really high with him. This is a really elusive striker that's got good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu. His offense is just as good as his defense. And I just feel that a better level opponent should have been in front of Javid Basharat in this fight, and that's no disrespect to Mendonca, but Mendonca's a debutant in the UFC, a fighter that's still yet to make his mark in the UFC, so I think that Basharat should have continued the step up in level of competition, and I just don't think Mendonca is that step up. But I don't think Mendonca's a bad fighter either. He's a fighter that's got good all-round skills, prefers to strike, very aggressive. He can obviously knock his opponent out. We saw that in his last fight. He will try and get into the clinch and make things dirty and ugly. But again, it's all traits that I think Javid Basharat has A, seen before, and B, absolutely built to deal with and defend against. I think that Mendonca's striking, although it's aggressive and although he's got knockout power, I think Javid Basharat's, again, going to be much better from a striking defense perspective. I think his striking defense is going to be better than the striking offense of Mendonca. Then when you add the striking offense in of Basharat, him landing combinations, his speed, his movement, his elusivity, I think that Mendonca's going to get hit a lot in this fight. Is it going to cause Mendonca to shoot a takedown? Maybe, but Javid Basharat is got very good wrestling defense. He could then just sprawl a takedown, get a position on top of Mendonca, start working his own jiu-jitsu. I think, again, Javid Basharat is just one of these fighters that, especially at this level against a fighter like Mendonca, I just think he's going to be too much. You know, the betting line's got Javid Basharat, you know, relatively heavily favoured at around -350, and I completely understand that. And, you know, there's an argument that that should be higher as well. I think Basharat's got this fight covered. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a fight that he's just going to be able to cruise through with no problems. He's definitely going to need to mind his P's and Q's because Mendonca is aggressive and he does hit hard. But outside of that, I think Basharat is a much better fighter in every discipline of mixed martial arts. So for those reasons, I'm picking Javid Basharat to win this fight. And in the next fight, again in this fight, a lot of things are going to ring very similar to the previous fight with Javid Basharat. That breakdown, we've got Allan Nascimento versus Carlos Hernandez. Now, Allan Nascimento is coming off that win against Jake Hadley as a relatively sized underdog. I bet Allan Nascimento in that fight really had a great read, and it played out exactly how I anticipated it to play out and how I analysed the fight to play out as well. And I think Allan Nascimento is a serious threat in this division to a lot of fighters. Again, I don't think Carlos Hernandez is the step up in competition that Nascimento should have had and deserved to have after beating someone like Jake Hadley, who in my opinion has got a super high ceiling and is going to go far in the division. Allan Nascimento here, again, Carlos Hernandez, let's move on to him to start with. You know, he's got this all-round type of game, you know, a new era MMA fighter who's a decent striker, decent wrestling, decent jiu-jitsu. But the thing is with Allan Nascimento, he's got that Brazilian aggressive nature where on the feet he'll come forward, he'll wing big shots, he'll look to land to the body, to the head, he'll mix in kicks as well, and he doesn't care because if he's over aggressive and you take him down, the grappling world is his world, and it's going to be his world in this fight as well. Nascimento's grappling is super strong. Whether he's on his back, he can reverse positions, get into a more advantageous position. Once he's on top, he's a nightmare to deal with, and there's a massive gap in skill in this fight in the grappling world. So Carlos Hernandez, I don't think he's going to take him down. I think he's going to just try and soak up some pressure, hopefully tire Nascimento out, maybe try and pick him apart on the feet. But the thing is, Nascimento can go for 3 rounds. He can shoot takedowns for 3 rounds. He can grapple for 3 rounds without getting too tired. So I think Carlos Hernandez, he's in a super bad spot in this fight. And ultimately the reason being is I don't think he's going to absolutely get the better of Allan Nascimento on the feet striking. And then when you look at the wrestling and the grappling, I think he's going to get completely run over in those positions as well. So I don't really see a true path to victory for Carlos Hernandez, aside from, you know, as I always say, they wear 4-ounce gloves. It only takes one shot in the right place. But for me, it's difficult to see Nascimento lose this fight stylistically and just from a skill set perspective as well, and how good he is as a fighter. So for those reasons, I'm picking Allan Nascimento to win this fight. In the next fight, this is a real interesting fight. We've got Daniel Argueta versus Isaac Dulgarian. Now, it's interesting because of Isaac Dulgarian. And the reason being is Isaac Dulgarian is 5-0 as a professional MMA fighter. He went 4-0 as an amateur fighter. So across those 9 fights in total, he's finished every single fight and finished every single fight in round 1 and finished every single fight relatively early in round 1 as well. So naturally, there's a some question marks to be had with Bulgarian. The first question mark is, what does his striking look like? And that might sound crazy because all fights start on the feet, so you'd think, oh, well, we must know what it looks like definitively. Well, Isaac Dulgarian's a wrestler. His background's in wrestling. His jiu-jitsu is very, very good. So in these fights with Dulgarian, he just sets his takedowns up with striking very early on. Now, the one thing I will say is, for me personally, I do find it a lot easier to see a deficiency, awkwardness in the strike in a fighter that's just not comfortable in striking than it is, or not easier, but quicker than it is to see a fighter that's got some deficiencies and holes in jiu-jitsu or wrestling. Now, Dulgarian, to me, doesn't strike me as the type of fighter that's got bad striking. Like, he looked comfortable on the feet, his movement looked good, he didn't look awkward, he didn't look like he just didn't want to strike because he can't strike. He looked like he didn't want to strike because his path to victory is wrestling. So I think from a striking perspective, I would have noticed those short moments in all of those 5 fights if he really had terrible striking or had some uncomfortability. A lot like Ben Askren, for example. You can tell with Ben Askren straight away that he's very uncomfortable striking. I didn't get that from Dulgarian. So another question to ask, what's Dulgarian's defensive wrestling like and defensive jiu-jitsu like? We don't know, because he's always been the wrestler, he's always been the topside grappler. Again, I've seen some moments where, his opponent has tried to maybe re-wrestle or try to defensively grapple themselves. And Dulgarian, I think, if he was a bad defensive wrestler and a bad defensive grappler, then that would surprise me a bit because of how good he is offensively. So again, the only real bad question that I've got to ask with Dulgarian is not on the striking, it's not on the defensive wrestling and grappling, it's more on the cardio. What does he look like if he's forced to fight 3 rounds? Because we don't know. So that's the one real issue here. Now you look at Daniel Argueta. He's a fighter that can slow down moving forwards as well. So if Dulgarian does have bad cardio moving forwards, then Argueta slows down also. But I just think that this fight is going to be really interesting. It's going to be real back and forth. I think it's going to be really close because how they match up stylistically. Like, Argueta's a wrestler and a grappler himself, so who's going to get the better of the wrestling? Who's going to get the better of the grappling? Who's going to be able to control positions? Like, I've seen Argueta be controlled, so that's a worry for Argueta, in my opinion. Even in the last fight he had before the UFC, he was taken down in round 1. His opponent caught a kick, took him down, spent pretty much the rest of that round 1 on top of him, and his opponent, I think, was more of a striker. So that's a question. Then you look at Damon Jackson in his last fight, and again, Damon Jackson's a solid grappler, so maybe you can give Argueta a pass there. Argueta's got some deficiencies within his defensive wrestling, defensive grappling. Dulgarian might have defensive issues in the wrestling and grappling as well, or he might just be a solid Armenian wrestler grappler like a Sarukian, for example, and just be able to dominate. This fight is, for me, one of the most intriguing fights on the card because Dulgarian looks like a serious prospect coming into the UFC. We've just yet to see all his tools. Argueta is seemingly a scrappy fighter that's always game. I think it's going to be a back and forth fight. The thing is, when it comes to predicting this fight and picking a winner, I haven't seen the defensive wrestling and defensive grappling issues of Dulgarian to date, but I have seen it of Argueta, which is slightly leaning me towards maybe Dulgarian gets the better of the wrestling and grappling from an offensive perspective, and Argueta's made to be defensive throughout the fight. So for those reasons, I am slightly siding with Isaac Dulgarian to win this fight. And talking of questions to be asked, we've got the returning Jimmy Flick versus Charles Johnson. Now, on Charles Johnson, straight away, I think he was very fortunate to get the win last time out against Nurmagomedov. It's a fight that I absolutely didn't think that Johnson had won. I thought Nurmagomedov had took it. Johnson looked I'm going to say much worse than what I expected him to look, but I don't mean that disrespectfully. Maybe Nurmagomedov just turned it up much better than I expected. I do still think Charles Johnson's a solid fighter. I just don't think he won that last fight. Now, with Jimmy Flick, the question to be asked is, when Flick won that fight in his debut in the UFC against Cody Durden a couple of years ago now, he said that he just wanted that win in the UFC and that was his dream, and now he's going to retire on a high and, he's got things lined up, etc. Why is Jimmy Flick back in the UFC if that was his mentality all the way back when? I kind of think, and again, I might be wrong, and if I am wrong, so be it. This is just my opinion. I do think that Jimmy Flick's back for a payday. I think he's still got an active contract in the UFC. I think he's kept himself active. He's clearly kept himself in the USADA pool as well, just in case he needed to come back and, get a paycheck from the UFC. And that's what I think he's done here. I don't necessarily think that he's fully invested in MMA in regards to that's his passion, and, fighting for a long, prosperous career is his dream, because he retired, or essentially retired from it after getting that one win in the UFC. He just wanted to say he'd won in the UFC. So there's question marks on Jimmy Flick for sure. However, moving on to the stylistic side, I think Jimmy Flick's absolutely the better grappler in this fight. The problem that I think he's going to have is being able to take Charles Johnson down with regularity. Charles Johnson, he can be taken down. We've seen him taken down. However, it's more been a Mohamed Mokaev, who's a seriously strong wrestler and has got a wrestling background. But Charles Johnson, from the most part, is strong. He's got good posture. He's got good takedown defense. He's definitely difficult to pin in one spot to be able to shoot a good entry into a takedown as well. And then when you're looking at the striking, I think the striking's light years ahead of where Jimmy Flick is. We even saw that with Durden. Durden was lighting Flick up before, the fight ended up on the mat and Flick got a triangle. So I think that Charles Johnson's got a lot of advantages in this fight. The one area where I think he struggles is if Flick manages to take him down or get into a top position. And then I think Charles Johnson is a little bit stuck. I don't think massively stuck, but he's definitely outgunned when it comes to the jiu-jitsu, in my opinion. The thing is, has Flick got the wrestling to be able to take Johnson down and take him down with purpose and cause a fight to be won and lost with that wrestling and grappling of Flick? I just don't think so. I think the fight's going to be won and lost with the fight on the feet, the better work being done by Johnson, quicker, faster, more urgent to win a fight, more determined to win a fight, because this is where Charles Johnson absolutely wants to be. I think there's a lot of upside on Johnson here. I wouldn't rule a Flick submission out. It wouldn't surprise me if you didn't watch the fight and you woke up the next day and you saw Jimmy Flick won by submission. I don't think that'd be a shock to anybody, but I do think that Charles Johnson's got the upside, so I'm picking Charles Johnson to win this fight. And we're down to the last fight to break down on this episode of the podcast. We've got Priscilla Cachoeira versus Sijara Eubanks. Now, the first thing to notice of surprise is Sijara Eubanks is a minus 200 favourite. Is a 37-year-old whose record is 7-7. I just don't agree with the betting line, to start with, the money line on Eubanks. However, as for how the fight plays out, I do think it's going to be quite close. I think Eubanks would serve herself great in this fight by really leaning on her wrestling, trying to take Cachoeira down, because Priscilla Cachoeira, she was one of those fighters that we weren't sure how long we were going to see her in the UFC a couple of years ago, but man, she's putting together some solid performances. She's looking exciting to watch. She's, the zombie girl. She'll come forward, she'll eat 3 punches if it means landing 4 herself, or she'll eat 5 punches if it means she can land 1 hard punch. She's a really exciting fighter to watch. Forward pressure, she's durable, she'll walk through your strikes. I do think where she does have holes, though, is within the defensive wrestling, and when she is taken down by a strong wrestler and someone that can sit on top side for long periods of time, lay heavy on top as well. And the thing is, I do think Eubanks has got the ability to do that. The one question mark I have with Eubanks is the cardio. When she is wrestling and grappling heavily, she can tire herself out. So Cachoeira, again, she hasn't got an insane gas tank, but she's definitely got one of those gas tanks that doesn't ever empty. It just lowers to a certain level and then they'll just maintain that level for the rest of the fight. I think it's going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be scrappy. I think we're going to see takedowns. I think we're going to see moments of grappling, and I think we're going to see moments of good striking as well. I just think the majority of the action across a full 15 minutes will be played out on the feet. And if that's right, and if it is played out on the feet, I think the aggression, the forward pressure, and like I say, the fact that Cachoeira will just try and take your head off with every shot, I think is going to play into the hands of Cachoeira from a finishing perspective. But also, if the fight goes to a decision, which I think is more likely, if I'm being honest, I think the judges just love seeing the work that Cachoeira does more than what her opponents do. And if Eubanks is looking for the wrestling and Cachoeira's just tiring her out and picking her apart on the feet and landing good strikes, I think the judges will favour that. So I'm actually going to be siding with Cachoeira in this fight. I'm picking Priscilla Cachoeira to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel or if you're new to MMA Play 365, again, thank you for finding us. Thank you for tuning in and listening. If you're on YouTube or a platform that does allow for comments, leave a comment, tell me your predictions, tell me where you disagree with me, tell me who you're betting on. It will be me that replies to everything from the platform, so I'll always try and get back to everybody. Again, I appreciate all the support, all the subscriptions to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel, the likes to the videos, the love that you guys show me every week. So listen, enjoy this first event. It's been a long time since we've had a UFC event, so make sure you chill out, grab a beer, grab some food, enjoy the event. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week.